a full battle stance again.
Building on Daniel's answer, I would like to ask Avital, what is your take on that? Daniel mentioned that the Strait of Hormuz is not closed yet, or wasn't closed because maybe there was China's pressure. Why do you think that this strait hasn't been closed yet, even though Iran hinted on closing it earlier?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it has to do with also the military capacity. It's not enough just to announce the closing of the straits. At the end of the day, there needs to be some sort of enforcement. And as Daniel said, and I totally agree, Iran is very weak militarily. Their capabilities have been eroded, and therefore I'm not sure they would even have the relevant power, the relevant military power, to actually enforce the closure of the straits. But if I want to take, your question a little bit forward and look at the future, one thing is clear for us here in Israel. Iran has been developing the nuclear capacity and ballistic facilities and manufacturing for the past 4 decades. Israel put an end to this in the last 12 days. But one thing is very clear to us. We will not wait again 40 more years for the Iranians to rebuild their capacity. So whichever agreement will eventually be reached, it will have to supply an answer to how do you inspect the future potential of manufacturing and rebuilding and building again the ballistic missile capabilities, because we will not reach the same point where we were just 12 days ago. So I think that should be really the focus for the future. And the question is, will Iran comply with these concessions? The price will be that the Iranian regime will stay. This maybe will be the price. But will Iran be willing to make the concessions? I think it's really early to know.
And now, Daniel, does the strike on Iranian military infrastructure that was struck earlier today after a ceasefire announcement increase the risk of reignition? And now that Israel and Iran both have increased casualties on the ground, what can you tell us more about it?
Well, I don't think we have a totally clear picture on either side about exactly all of the damage that has been done and all of the casualties that have mounted. As Avital said, they're still pulling the dead from the rubble in Israel. I imagine the same is pretty much true in Iran. But getting back to an earlier point that you were discussing about with Avital about the Strait of Hormuz, let's not forget also that regardless of whatever capability the Iranians might have to potentially close or attempt to close the strait, the U.S. has plenty of firepower that it shifted from Asia back to the Middle East. And I think the U.S. ability to keep that sea lane open is greater than Iran's ability to try to close it. So we can expect that American firepower is going to remain in the region for some time. And clearly, the Americans will continue to work closely with the Israelis from a monitoring perspective and also a future enforcement perspective. I think it's also very clear that we can't take the Iranians at their word. They've been very good at manipulating the negotiation process in previous years. And they've also been very good at stringing various US presidents along in the process. I salute President Trump for having the courage to actually do what needed to be done. And as we've seen, various previous American presidents have hesitated to do so. So now that calculus has changed, I would like to believe that the Iranians are going to get the message that business as usual is not going to work. If they're going to attempt to reconstitute their nuclear program in the coming weeks and months, they can expect a robust response from the Israelis and the Americans. Presumably that's going to influence their behavior. But if they don't find that enriched uranium, there can be little doubt that the Iranians are going to want to reconstitute that program.
And Daniel, building on Avital's earlier answer that she said either it will be a regime change or ceasefire, what about the price that Iranian people will have to pay for a ceasefire? What do you think about that? What will Iranian people have to pay or do for a ceasefire and maybe a regime change?
Well, let's be clear, the Iranian people are paying a price, the majority of the price, if the Iranian regime stays as it is. And with Khamenei in place, and with replacements for all of the military leaders that have been removed by the Israelis already in place, there can be little doubt that they're going to just try to, pick up where they left off or where they were forced to leave off. Unfortunately, the Iranian people don't seem like they're ready to overthrow their government. They've rallied around the flag, as is often the case when you have events like this. They're being very nationalistic. It's very common throughout the world that that would be the case. And there's just such a grip that the Iranian government has on the Iranian people that it's very difficult for dissidents and people who are opposed to the Iranian government to prevail. So I live in hope still that one day the Iranian people will be able to stand up and will overthrow their government. I would have thought this would be a perfect time to do that, but I don't think it's going to happen.
And now going back and looking back at the battlefield, Avital, can you give us context on the military objectives behind the recent strikes on IRGC underground missile sites in western Iran? And how significant is the fact that a missile launcher intended for use against IAF jets was destroyed? Was this a preventive or strike or retaliation for what Iran has done?
So you're describing actually the goals that we have here in this war. There are two goals that Israel set to 12 days ago, and they still are very much relevant. The first one is to remove the nuclear threat, which is an existential threat for Israel. And it's enough to hear and see for decades the Iranian regime chant death to Israel, death to America, and actually educate generations and generations of Iranians on this ideology. The second issue, the second goal is the removal of the ballistic missiles. Now, you saw yesterday at night a few missiles that Iran fired to an airbase, an American airbase in Qatar. These are not the same missiles which Israel has been targeting with. We are talking about a lot smaller, short-range missiles. The missiles that Iran has been developing, procuring, manufacturing, and these are the ones who were fired to Israel in the last 12 days. By the way, more than 500 of them. One missile costs between $2 and $3 million. These are huge missiles which can carry hundreds of kilograms in a warhead. Obviously, with nuclear capacity, perhaps they will be able one day to carry nuclear warheads as well. So this is another existential threat. So these are the two main goals which Israel set in the beginning of the war 12 days ago. And as I said before, we were pretty confident that we achieved quite promising accomplishments following the last 12 days. Of course, there are more targets that Israel can hit. And of course, there is no trust with Iran. I mean, with a tweet or without a tweet, it's not that suddenly there is a trust that is born between Israel and the Iranian regime. I can also say something, about the Iranian people. The Israelis have nothing against the Iranian people. As a matter of fact, there was a big Israeli community that lived in Iran until 1979 and until the Shah fell. There were even direct flights between Israel and Tehran. And those Israelis who, of course, evacuated in 79 and came back to Israel, those Israelis speak with very good memories as they describe their life in Iran. So I believe that under a different regime, this could be achieved. But, however, the goal of the war, but from an Israeli perspective, was not to change the regime. This is something that has to be done from within the Iranian people. Um, I'm not sure we're at the end. I'm not sure this is a stage which we can, smile and put it behind us. We are still pulling people out of the rubble in a 6-floor high building in Beersheba. And the Iranians, as we've seen, their viciousness and brutality, they kept on aiming their missiles only to populated areas where civilians live. There is no base there in that neighborhood they targeted. And there are no base in Haifa, in the area where they targeted an hour ago. So I don't see in the immediate time any stability. We'll have to see and wait for the next couple of days to see where this takes us.
Daniel, I would like to ask your analysis on what just our other guest described about Israel's goal towards Iran, and how much have they accomplished? What is your take on that?
Well, I think Avital's exactly right. It's astonishing what the Israelis have achieved, particularly considering that they've been at war since October 7th and that they've had multiple enemies on multiple fronts during that period and have basically decapitated all of them. When you consider the size of Israel and the size of the countries around it, and the number of people who are opposed to Israel that live around Israel and in the neighborhood, I'm just, gobsmacked. I'm blown away by what the Israelis have been able to achieve. Tactically, strategically, it's just been unbelievable. I would say that this has to really give the Iranians pause for thought about what they're going to do next.
Now, going back to the analysis of this situation, Daniel, are we now entering a new normal of short and intense conflicts with no clear endpoints, just like the one happened last month with Pakistan and India, and now with Iran and Israel, and how do states plan for that risk?
I mean, the world has rarely been in such a perilous state, in the absence of a world war, to have so many conflicts occurring simultaneously. I don't think that the Israel-Iran conflict is going to become a forever war. In fact, it's probably going to be noteworthy for its brevity, but it is certainly joining a long list of conflicts around the world that are contributing to a very unstable environment and a lot of unknowns vis-a-vis the global economy, the idea of policymakers making policy, the ability of things to get done. I mean, just think about how disruptive this conflict has been in the last 1 to 2 weeks for air traffic and sea traffic alone. It's, really something that we should have some pause for thought on in terms of the impact that it's already had. I'm hopeful that some of these conflicts around the world will be resolved soon. I don't think Ukraine is going to be one of those. I don't think that the conflicts that Israel has on its borders and in the region are going to be resolved anytime soon. So Israel's going to be in a defensive posture, and it's going to have to double down on its alliance with America and other countries, because the threat is certainly not going away.
Now, Avital, building on Daniel's answer, would you like to add something on that? And if Israel now has to look for more alliances, what countries is Israel eyeing for within Middle East?
So Israel has been dealing with ideologically motivated Shiite axis in the region, whether it's Hezbollah in Lebanon, whether it was the pre-Jolani situation in Syria with Assad, whether it's Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza and in the West Bank. And of course, there are fragments in Iraq, there are the Houthis in Yemen, and so on and so forth. Imagine a situation in which all these fronts are more or less stabilized, and we see already the fruit of that in Lebanon, where Hezbollah stood idly by and did not actively support Iran. It made the mistake already on October 8th, which decided to support Hamas after what they did in Israel, and they're not going to repeat that mistake. So they're sitting back. Jolani is singing a new tune in Syria, which is not in the same accords with Iran. Of course, with moderate Arab countries that normalized relations with Israel, 5 years ago, next month, the Abraham Accords, of course, I'm talking about the UAE and Bahrain and Morocco, if that could be expanded to additional moderate countries in the region, I think that would shape a new Middle East. And it will not only stay within the borders of the Middle East, it will have a global implication. Because even today, you have vessels that are not entering the Red Sea because of the Houthis. And most of Israel's cargo does not even come from that area. So it's not an Israeli issue. Basically, it's a global issue, and that's the way it should be treated. Yes, Israel did the work for the world, you can say that, and achieved a lot of achievements in all of those fronts I mentioned, including Iran now. But from this moment on, it needs to be treated globally. I know one thing that Israel learned, and this will shape its tactic going forward, and that is not waiting for additional accumulation of weapons in each of the fronts which I mentioned. And you're seeing what's going on in Lebanon today, for example, after the ceasefire agreement has been signed. If there are signs of an immediate threat on Israel, then Israel eliminates that threat. It could happen 3 times a day, it could happen once a week. The same goes to Iran, and the same will need to go to every single other enemy that Israel has in the region. But I want to be optimistic and hope that once the region stabilizes, we'll be able to expand the Abraham Accords. One thing I cannot leave without saying, and that is the 50 hostages that we still have in Gaza. And this is an open scar, an open wound for the Israeli people. Hamas, there is a slim hope that Hamas will, perhaps under the pressure that Israel put on Iran, will be willing to take some measures and release at least those 20 who are alive. But right now, it doesn't seem that this is the way it's going. So this is something, of course, that Israel will need to bring to a closure.
So thank you very much, Lieutenant Avital, Colonel Avital Libor.